Welcome to the She's Bold podcast. I'm Beth Whitman. Hey there. How's everybody doing this week? How are you dealing with this? It's kind of crazy to see how we're all going through this health crisis and, how it's different depending on where you live, what your days are like. Are you working overtime or are you sitting idle? And also what stage you're in your lockdown, like if you're even locked down at all. When they say that we're in this together, I just don't feel like that. It's just all too different for each one of us. And I don't know, I think most of us are feeling lonelier than ever, right? Alone together, but it's just kind of alone. I do think that no matter what phase or stage you're in, there are some things we can definitely agree with. And we're all just trying to find happiness. We're trying to find stability. And really, we're looking for some sort of normalcy each day. And even then, I know there's guilt with feeling happy right now. If you have a small win of some kind, you may not want to celebrate publicly because, we just know most people aren't feeling those wins right now. Most people are really struggling and it's difficult to find happiness. So we have to kind of even keep that happiness to ourselves. And I'm not saying that that's a good thing or a bad thing. It just is. But I think whether you choose to share your happiness or not, we know that happiness comes from within. And whether a crisis is big or small, we do have control over how we respond to it. The question is, how are you responding to this virus? Today's episode is all about happiness. Laura Musikanski has been on the podcast previously on episode number 79, and that was early in 2019. Laura is the executive director of the Happiness Alliance, and her data collecting around this topic was born out of Bhutan's philosophy of gross national happiness. She conducts surveys about people's level of happiness and then dissects that information to better understand what's happening in communities and in universities and within groups. You can actually take that survey at happycounts.org, which I will link to in the show notes. So in this episode, we do talk all about happiness and specifically how it relates to COVID-19. And Laura shares some of the more recent data she's collected and the trends that she's seeing. But she also gets personal with how this health crisis has affected her and how this time has provided her with a chance to examine her own mortality and how she's at peace with it. Now, at first glance, this may not seem like the most uplifting of messages, but it's all very Buddhist. This idea of focusing on death and accepting it so that one can live a more fulfilling and mindful life. So please keep that in mind, especially toward the end of this episode when she gets into that message a bit. Before we get to that, one quick word. If you do enjoy the show and would like to support it, you can do so with a donation through Patreon. You'll have access to bonus content and have the ability to ask questions of the guests. And ladies, you'll be invited to a private Facebook group that we have. And I will tell you that the support I receive from this small but mighty community on Patreon is invaluable. These folks are stepping up and telling me that the mission of the show is important to them. They understand the value of bringing these conversations to light, especially at a time when we are feeling so much darkness around us. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/bebold. And if you'd prefer to make a one-time donation, you can do that too via Venmo or PayPal. And that information is all on the Patreon page. So with that little bit of information to inspire you to go to patreon.com/bebold, I want you to please enjoy this conversation with Laura Musikanski. Laura, it is so great to be reconnected with you. Although I wish it was under different circumstances, but I really feel like there's no better time to chat with you than in the middle of a pandemic, when we're all trying to figure out how to be happy, how to stay happy, how to get out of bed, how to get dressed, how to put on your makeup, and how to bring some kind of normalcy, I think, to our everyday and not be pulled down by just everything that's happening around us. So thanks so much for joining me again.
Oh,
So
thank you, Beth, for doing what you're doing. It's beautiful.
Oh, yeah, no problem. So we last spoke, it was in February, I believe, last year, 2019, and that's episode 79. So if anybody wants to go back and listen to that, they can get a much bigger, fuller picture of what it is you do in the world of happiness. But would you just give us just a kind of a brief synopsis of exactly what it is you are doing? Kind of big picture.
My name is Laura Musikanski, and I am the Executive Director of the Happiness Alliance. So we are an organization that provides a version of Bhutan's Gross National Happiness Index to anybody, anywhere for use in understanding what their own happiness is along the dimensions of happiness because life is complicated, and also to communities as well as universities and governments. So we have worked with national governments such as Kuwait, as well as small communities. And when we first started, we worked with Seattle City Council. We also work with all kinds of different groups, and anybody can go to happycounts.org and take the Happiness Index survey and get their own assessment of their happiness and their well-being along the domains of happiness, which we'll probably talk about later. And they'll get their scorecard, and that's at Happy Counts, HAPPYCOUNTS.org, because we're a nonprofit.
Are there other ways that you're collecting data pre-virus and right now? Are other than on the website, are there ways that you're collecting data?
So we collect data with the happiness index, and then we provide anybody who wants it a unique URL so that they can collect data as well. But this is the mode in which we collect data, and it's called a convenient sampling. So we're not doing what's called a random sampling. Anybody who wants to take the survey takes the survey, and that's the way that we collect the data.
And have you found that more people are coming to the website to enter their data since the pandemic?
To take the happiness index?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It hasn't, we had a little bit of a decrease at the beginning of the pandemic, but it's about the same now. So we get between 1,000 and 1,500 people a month take the survey. And those people, I'd say about between 85 and 90 from the US, although a growing number are from other countries because we have another project. So our nonprofit has various projects, and one of them is called Planet Happiness, where this is being administered in World Heritage Sites. But I just looked at the data recently to see what are some of the changes that are happening between 2019 and then March and half of about up to April 22nd to look at, what are some of the variations. And I was surprised to find that where the increases are, so we'll start with the positive. I was really surprised that we are actually increased by about a point, 2 points. This is on a scale of 100. So, and this data is for about 2,000 people who took the survey in March and then the beginning of April. So it's right in that sort of pandemic hotspot. So we actually increased our scores in terms of government. And so government is one of the domains of happiness. And I was interested to see, where did those scores increase? Did they increase in terms of trust in local government, trust in national government, sense that people in government are listening to you, or in terms of, do you feel like your government is corrupt in terms of the local government? And we actually have increased our sense of lack of corruption in local government since the pandemic. Now, this is an average for about the 2,000 people who took the survey. And of course, this is a convenient sample people who opted to take the survey. So it's an indication of a question to ask is, how is this pandemic affecting our relationship to government, especially in the US, where we're having some real disruption due to and incidental from the pandemic with relationship to our national government and our relationship to government. These are questions to ask, like, how do you feel about your local government since the pandemic has started? And we'll talk later about what is the pandemic telling us.
What were the results of this regarding that question about government?
About corruption specifically, is that we actually sense that there is less corruption in our local government since the pandemic. It's a small gain, but it's an interesting gain that our sense of corruption in local government has decreased since the pandemic. That's not the same for national government, right? We can't say that we have less of a sense of corruption in national government. One, because we don't get that data, and two, because our sense of trust in national government has not gotten better.
You asked that question about on the national level also.
Yes. Yeah.
What do
Yeah.
you think that increase is from on the local level?
My own sense, now I haven't done a study on this, but my own feeling about this is that we are now seeing how important local government is to our happiness and well-being. In a sense, we're also seeing how much good government can do. And my deep hope is that we will become more engaged in our democratic process, because there are a few things that are very, very important to your happiness. Number one is others. Number one is community. And you know this from the pandemic, because a lot of us have lost or drastically changed how we relate to our community and how we are in our community. But another one that's very important to our happiness is our government, what kind of government we live in. And we can take that to an extreme. People living in war zones are very, very unhappy. Those governments have broken down. So that's obvious, but we can take it to the other extreme of people living in really happy, healthy governments are very happy. Why is Finland, Sweden, Iceland, why do these countries keep coming out the highest on the World Happiness reports? It's because they have really fantastic governments, for the most part, that offer lots of social safety nets and that really care about people's well-being. So my hope is that we will really make that connection in our hearts and minds, and that we will become much more engaged in our government, where we have a society in the U.S. where we feel like we can't make a difference.
What were some other data points that came out from that?
I wanted to focus on the positive again.
Yeah.
Volunteerism really went up, which kind of makes sense because you have more time, you're not working, but kind of doesn't, because like, where are you going to go volunteer? Who knows where people are going to volunteer? We don't have that data, but volunteerism went up. That was the highest gain.
Does that mean that the way that the question was asked, does that mean that more people are volunteering, or that they feel better about it, or they want to?
No, the question is, essentially, it's a kind of time use question. How often have you volunteered in the last year? Like never to once a month. And so people are volunteering more, and people are also donating more. So we have two different questions. How often do you volunteer? How often do you give to charities? So the World Happiness Report, which I've mentioned before, that's the report that comes out every year and tells which country is happiest. They have 6 factors that explain what we call life satisfaction. And I'll go to that in a minute. And one of them is donations, how often people donate. But we asked 2. We want to know how often people volunteer, because we feel that volunteerism is very, very connected to community, which is really important to happiness, right? But it's interesting that volunteerism has increased so much. That's on about 6 on a scale of 0 to 100. And then donations increased about 2 on a scale of 0 to 100. That kind of goes to the next piece, which I think we'll talk about, is what is COVID telling us. But I want to tell you a little bit of the bad news, which is that satisfaction with life, which we have 2 different questions on that. How satisfied is your life? And then there's another one called the Cantrell ladder, which I won't go into. If you're a data scientist, you know what the Cantrell ladder is. And then we also have questions on psychological well-being. So these are questions about a sense of purpose. Do you feel like your life is worthwhile? Do you have a sense of optimism? These kind of questions. And in my own personal view, where satisfaction with life is used as the predominant question is, are you satisfied with your life? Do you lead a satisfactory life? Is used as the predominant question for rating happiness and well-being among nations. I think the real sort of driver and the, how would you say it? Like the real like meaning of all of this is psychological well-being. You will have a happy life. You will feel satisfied with your life when you feel like you have a sense of purpose, when you feel like you are worthwhile and you feel like your life is worthwhile, when you feel positive about yourself, when you have a sense of optimism. And both of these have gone down by 2 points since the pandemic.
What I'm hearing from you is that the data points, the 2 data points where the trust in local government went up by 2 data points, and how people are feeling about themselves has gone down by 2 data points. You are making note that that's a change that you want to recognize. To me, the fact that you're bringing it up, it may seem like it's maybe a significant change, one way or the other. To me, it doesn't sound that big of a deal, but
Yeah.
but you're the data scientist. So what do you say about that, about those changes there?
So just a couple things for data scientists. Like we can't say this is significant, and I'm not a data scientist. I'm just somebody who loves data. So,
Okay.
so for me, this is really interesting because what this is saying, hopefully, is that people will recognize that their relationship to their government has an impact on their satisfaction with life and their psychological well-being, and they will become engaged in that because everybody wants to be happier. However you define happiness, maybe you define it as you like to cry every day. That's fine. That's how you define happiness, but everybody wants to be happier. So people will become more engaged in their local government. They will see that volunteering really does make them happier, that it increases people. That they'll see that, and then they'll do more of it to bring those numbers back up. You're right that 2 points, 5 points on a 100-point scale doesn't seem like a really big change, and maybe it isn't. We'd have to do more studying for this, but also maybe it is. These are averages, right? So we'd want to dig deeper into this and look at, what is the difference for young people versus people in the middle ages? What are the difference for people in different socioeconomic classes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So it's really broad strokes across the board. And you don't have a super detailed information, but it is more just kind of broad strokes. And it is interesting. And like you said, they're interesting points to kind of see what emerges from it as well.
Yeah. And the question here is, how are you doing? How were you, if you look back on your life before, in February, before COVID took our world over, and how did you feel about your life? And then you look today in the midst of the COVID crisis, where we're, right now we're about to be released to a certain degree outside, but we also, all of us know that this is coming in waves and that we don't know what the future is. So how are you doing in terms of your satisfaction with life, in your psychological well-being? And what have you been doing in your life that has contributed to maintaining or increasing that, or has contributed to decreasing that? And what has happened that is outside of your control or influence besides COVID that has increased or decreased your satisfaction with life and your psychological well-being? So those are the questions that are the point of all of this. And we can talk about the societal changes that need to happen, and those are really important. But really what everything comes down to is the individual.
Well, how do you address that? I believe on your website you have information, and I can link to it in the show notes. But on the website, you've got information on actually how to be happy, what those conditions are. So can you walk us through that?
Yeah, so we have on the website it says how to be happy, and then also it talks about how to increase happiness in your community and how you can take action. And then also we produce reports, happiness report cards, and those are very personal. So those go, like you said, more into the details of the data, and then give some ideas of ways to increase happiness with relationship to specific, what we call indicators, or specific questions within the happiness index. But then we also have the broad strokes. So if you pick up a book of the How to Be Happy book, or any of
Happiness for Dummies.
Yeah,
I don't know if that exists, but
right. You're going to get, I think of it as three basic lessons. You're going to look at lessons about gratitude practices, doing a gratitude journal, writing a letter, generosity, so giving, and also giving to yourself. But certainly, we talked about donations, and those actually do increase your happiness in the long term as well. And then you'll get information about mindfulness, which there's a ton about information about mindfulness. Where we start at the Happiness Alliance is we start with your feelings, because so often you hear it's an inside job, or that happiness is all up to you. But there's a really important part of the happiness work that is in terms of your feelings, and that you can't always be happy. You also have to feel the what we call negative, or some people call bad feelings as well. And so to really value that you have all of those feelings and not try to push those away. And then some tools of how do you deal with those difficult feelings? Like, how do you deal with anger? How do you not just push that away and then have it come out sideways? These kinds of things. So we start there, and then we go to those practices of gratitude and generosity and mindfulness. And then from there, we go into, I remember one person commented on the happiness index. It was like a question about comments, and they said, all you oneness people, you one world people. So it's right. So we go to the idea of that we are not creatures on this earth that conquer it, but that we are the earth. And so reorienting oneself around seeing oneself. I like to, when I give talks to little kids, I like to say, if you imagine that you were out in outer space and you look down on the earth, would you see humans as separate, or would you see humans as part of the earth? Would you see yourself as like some separate thing that, so just giving people an orientation around that. And then from there going to what another piece that you often see when you hear about happiness is taking care of your body, because when you take care of your body, you are taking care of the earth. And then from there we go to community. So once you kind of fill yourself up, then you can start doing that thing that is the most important to happiness, to making somebody else happy, like the Dalai Lama said, or in another sense of, what is happiness in one word? It's others. But first you have to take care of yourself, right? That's not selfish. And we need orientation around that, because oftentimes we didn't learn that. We learned the opposite,
Right.
that taking care of yourself is selfish, and that you should, don't be angry, don't be sad.
Right. Especially as women, too. That's, I think, something that we're taught. Just a little bit of a side note here, that it's very interesting timing. I think it was late last year, and I had an astrophysicist on the podcast, Sarah Tuttle. I suddenly took this weird interest in astronomy, and I started reading a book, and my mind just got blown away. And I, have felt like a 12-year-old boy, like, oh my God, can you believe this? Like billions and trillions, and like, just trying to shake everybody that I come in contact with in an embarrassing way, going, oh my God, can you believe this stuff? Because somehow for the past 54 years, I missed it. I wasn't on that train. But now that I have this, so I have this time, and I'm feeling really part of the earth, really feeling part of the globe, and feeling part of, the universe. I look out at things, and I just spend time kind of looking out the window, noticing the clouds, and I'm seeing them in such different ways now. It's not as if I'm looking up at them. It's as if, like you just described, I am looking out at them covering the earth. And it's a really weird perspective. It's something that I had never thought about before. So this time and this crisis, just kind of hits after I've just gained, some knowledge that I never had before, and I can kind of put everything into perspective. So it's interesting that you bring that up in terms of, describing it as us, really being part of the earth, because I feel that like I've never felt before, because I have a much better understanding of it as well.
Oh, that's beautiful.
That's just a little sidetrack there.
That's beautiful. The old black print of the guy who's lifting up the veil and is from the earth, and he's got his head in the universe. I'll send you the image of it. But that's that experience. Yes, that's it.
Isn't that great? It's so funny. So for listeners, I have it here on my desk, something to color in, because it's on that. One of my new geeky things is I look at NASA's photo of the day. And about a month ago, this was their photo of the day, and they were encouraging people to print it out so they could color. So I've got it here with all my colored pencils, and it's still black and white, but it's here as something that I'm going to work on soon. It's so funny that you said that.
Beautiful.
I know.
Yeah. No, but I think that is the spiritual, that was a representation of the spiritual journey, of the inner journey. That for me, personally, that's what COVID has been for me. So when COVID came into my life, so my partner is an emergency room doctor. And so it's not a question of whether, it's a question of when COVID will come into my life as a disease.
Meaning you believe that you will contract it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he's going to be around people who have COVID, and the woes of he works in rural hospital, the woes of of the hospitals not having sufficient provisions. They're true. I know this from personal experience with my partner. So it's been, for me, I've taken this as a point of really, really looking inward, and none of us know how COVID is going to take our lives, and none of us know how it's going to take those in our lives who are vulnerable. So if you still have parents alive, or you have friends who are, vulnerable or older. So I've taken this as a time to take a real inner journey and to look at my life as in terms of, let's assume that it's ending very soon here. And so what does that mean? And just setting that intention has caused.
You mean your life ending, not the
Yeah,
crisis. Okay.
yeah. Let's assume that this part of the earth,
Mm-hmm.
will go, back into dust. So that has been my intention when this started, and it's taken me in some interesting directions that I didn't think would happen, which has made me want to live even more. And that I've had some real healing around some of my world vision and some of the what in psychology is called the original event, the original harming. And I'll say that I also have a friend, and I've been, maybe this is sort of cheating, I've been taking walks with her before COVID, when I knew that both of us are in a situation where we would be exposed. And so we've continued to have our walks together and been talking about these things on this spiritual journey. And I've limited it to her and to my partner, the interactions. But it has really been a revelation for me in my own life, that I have gotten to see things about myself and found ways towards healing those pieces. So, they say in psychology there's two major issues that cause lots of problems throughout life, and one is being overwhelmed and one is being abandoned. And then, unless you have a parent who really takes care of you when you feel overwhelmed or abandoned, then you end up with these dysfunctional ways of being in the world. So for me, it's abandonment. And I love my parents. And also, as with all parents, they were utterly inadequate, as I am as a parent. It's like it doesn't come with a manual, unfortunately. We just, or we fail, But it's just, I've seen how to work with that in a way that makes life feel a lot better now. And was able to recognize this worldview that I had, which was that anything good about me isn't true, and anything bad about me is the truth. And that was revealed to me through setting that intention and through this spiritual journey that I've been taking during this time when our world is in upheaval, which is, to me, reflective of the inner upheaval that I have never really addressed. I mean, I've done lots of therapy and lots of self-healing with my mindfulness practice, et cetera, and other practices, but never really found a way to deeply address that. And so I would say for me that thanks to COVID, I have seen in myself personal growth that I never really imagined that could happen.
Is it specifically because you realize there's a potential for you to die sooner than you thought? Like maybe you thought you would live to 100 or 80 or whatever that number is, and barring some kind of a catastrophe, that would be your expiration date. But now you're seeing it much more closer.
Yeah.
And so as a result, you are re-examining things.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. No, I take it very personally. I think that COVID is we just don't know. We don't know how it's going to affect us. And the same thing with our family members. So it's a really good time to clean the house. And, cleaning the house is the inner house. So whether or not I can heal my relationship with certain family members, I can heal it inside me. And I have, in my own view, I have a deadline, and it's okay if it doesn't happen, because I'll be better for it. And it will be okay if it happens. I don't want to die, but it will be okay if it happens because I'm living as best I can. I'm living the life that I'm meant to live as best I can right now. And things are being revealed that I'm open to.
Kind of brings a little tear to my eye. I'm glad you said you don't want to die. You're not ready ready to die, but you sound accepting of it, and you are fairly certain that this virus is going to come into your life. My response to that is, well, aren't you doing everything possible to prevent it from coming into your life and into your house?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And, yeah, absolutely. We wash our hands and we limit and we wear our masks and all of these things for ourselves, but also for others, right? Because we don't want to spread it to others. And thank heavens for Zoom. I would have thought that Zoom would be something that we just love, right? And the others that are coming that are going to help, fill the gaps where Zoom doesn't. But COVID is like the common cold, about half of what the common colds that we have are a form of COVID that have calmed down. So we've never found a remedy for the common cold. The chance that we'll find a remedy for COVID-19 until it calms down, realistically, are probably kind of low. I mean, technology can do fantastic things, but realistically, COVID-19 is something that it may be here to stay for a long time until it calms down and doesn't kill us.
What do you mean calms down?
Well, the common cold it doesn't kill that many people, right? But when it first came into humans, it was probably a lot like this historically before now. So, it's not, the novel part isn't the COVID, it's the coronavirus. It's the 19 coronavirus piece that's novel, right? But the COVID piece isn't novel. I mean, we've been living with that. But at some point, probably when the common cold was novel, it did something like what it's doing now to
Well,
human population.
it's just like what happened to Native Americans or those in populations that they have little to no contact with outsiders. And I'm thinking specifically of those in the Amazon, and because they are near and dear to my heart, the people of Papua New Guinea, where
Yeah.
I don't know if there's still no contacted tribes there or uncontacted tribes, but I would say they're pretty deep in the woods and they have very little contact.
Yeah.
So just like that affects them, this is now affecting us.
Exactly. And then there's the other piece is that this is coming from our encroachment on nature, our inappropriate encroachment on nature, and we're not stopping. So, COVID-19, we may calm it down, we may find a cure for it, but something else will come along. So for me, in terms of, what this is that we are living through a major event that humans have lived through over and over and over again. And so in this sense, to take this very personally, in that, we may live through this year, but we don't know what's going to happen next year. And we don't know how COVID-19 is going to interact with us in terms of what is it going to do to our life expectancy? What is it going to do to us as we age? These kinds of things. So that's a very scary way of looking at COVID. But in that fear, just like within other, what we called it earlier, negative, or people think bad emotions, in that fear, if you go down into it, like stay with that fear and then go down into it, like what is the wisdom there? What is the real wisdom that, and from that comes my own keys to really living a fulfilling life. It's not comfortable.
And that going deep is personal.
Yeah.
There's no one answer. You're suggesting that we all have to ask that question of ourselves.
Yeah. And we all get to that point where we open up the veil and we experience ourselves as the stars, as a star, which is, in my view, utterly and completely appropriate, is that each one of us is a phenomenal star. If we can live that experience in daily life, or just have some of it in daily life, if COVID can give us that, that would be wonderful. It's not a cure. It's not, there's still all of the threat of it there, and it's still doing what it's doing. But I think that's for me, that's one of the things that COVID is saying.
I want to end it on that, because I think it's really poignant to leave people with that kind of a thought. I think it is both negative and sad and heartbreaking, but I also think it's very positive. I also think it's like, oh, okay, this is a time really to reflect. And not everybody, some people are working more than ever. A lot of us we have a little time. We have a little extra time on our hands, and for better or worse. And after we've reorganized the closets and dusted off the bookshelves and donated the books that we're never going to read, and, vacuumed every square inch of the house, now we're saying, okay, we're ready for this to be over. Let's move on. And it's not moving on. So what do we do with our time? And I think it is a really good time for reflection. And, just as you said, I do have one question for you as we do wrap up. Are your thoughts around this, do they come from the knowledge that you receive in having a partner in the medical field?
In part, and also in part from, I've done a lot of learning about what brings about happiness, and I've written a couple of books now on the field. So I have the Happiness Policy Handbook. We did lots of research about what are the contributors to happiness, and I have the first course book called Happiness, Wellbeing.
Oh, I'm sorry. First, say the names of your books.
Oh, yeah. So I have a course book. It's the first course book that brings happiness as a personal happiness, and then social change, societal change together, called Happiness, Wellbeing, and Sustainability, of course, and Systems Change. And then I have a book coming out with my Dharma teacher, Robert Beatty, called Happiness for a Mindful Life. So I'd say that a little bit of it comes from my interactions with my partner who's working in the ER, but most of it comes from my understanding of what brings about happiness. And there's a big, huge myth about happiness, is that you can just change your mind and be happy. And that the part that we think of as the unhappy pieces, your sadness, your fear, your anger, those are really, really important to explore and to go into, because when you do that, when you really allow for those feelings and go into them and ask, what is this pointing to? What is the wisdom in this? Then you will find that you experience happiness at new levels, at much deeper levels, and at much higher levels. And so we could call this, instead of calling it the Happiness Alliance, we could call it the Unhappiness Alliance. Mm-hmm. And that might be an appropriate name, but nobody would want to come and take the unhappiness index. So...
Well, specifically, and I should have, and I appreciate that, what you just shared, and kind of what informs you. I should have been more specific, but the information that you're getting in terms of how this virus relates to what we've been through in the past, and what we might be looking at in the coming year. Yeah, that insight is something that I haven't heard before. I haven't given that kind of thought to before. And is that what is coming from?
Yes,
okay,
yeah.
From the medical field.
Talk to a doctor who studied immunology. I mean, talk to somebody who's studied these kinds of things for one of your podcasts, maybe, and hear what they have to say. So yes, my understanding of COVID is very much coming from my partner, who works in the ER and has studied how viruses and colds affect humans and how they come into human civilization.
One thing that I did read just in the last couple of days that surprised me, just because it's not something that I know in my background, I just don't have that information, is that the way this is mutating. And I just read something that they think that the version of it that was here in Washington State is different than the one that has hit, New York and New Jersey. And I think if you extrapolate from that, then you can say, well, maybe it's just a more harsh strain, and that's why so many more people were dying there. I don't know. I don't know if anybody has actually said that. I'll have to read up on it, but I did just come across an article yesterday about the way that it's mutating. So I think that's interesting and
scary.
And scary, right? It
Yes.
is. It is.
Very scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to end on that note, but but maybe it means that it's time for us all to get in touch with our feelings more, and understand what we're going through and do a deep dive and take that time to do the deep dive on it. So there's no better time.
There's deep, deep wisdom for your own inner journey in all of that, in all of what we call the negative feelings. There's such deep wisdom. And it's, if you can find somebody to do that journey with, a friend, a spiritual friend, to do that journey with, whether it's on walks, so you call that person part of your family, so you take walks with them, or on Zoom, it's really too hard to do alone. Just somebody you can talk on the phone, or
right, to have that to be able to bounce off. Is there anything that you'd like to leave people with today? Anything specific that I didn't ask or that we didn't talk about? And I know that we could talk for another hour, but I'm trying to keep these episodes a little bit shorter.
Yeah.
But is there anything else that you would want to share today?
I'm very interested in what is COVID telling you. So I can be reached at laura@happycounts.org. And that is something that's very interesting to me, is what is COVID telling you?
And then we should encourage everyone to go to happycounts.org and take the test. I do have a question about that, because I have taken that test, but I think it was a year ago before we spoke the last time. Do you encourage people to go back and take it on a monthly basis, to take that survey?
On a basis that is right for them. So if you've had a major life event, take it again and, download your scores and then take it again and see how things have changed, and then, reflect on that.
But it might be a good habit to get into, right?
Yeah,
I mean, and that doesn't screw up your data at all. I guess that's what I'm thinking. Okay, that might be interesting, just to encourage everyone to go and take it. Like first of the month, this is like, take your vitamins in the morning, or, you just put this on your calendar and you do it once a month and see how it works. So, Laura, thanks again so much for spending time with me, and it's really delightful to connect with you after a year plus, and hopefully next time we'll see each other in person. Maybe we'll get to go for a walk together.
Yes, that would be lovely. Yeah, and Beth, thank you for what you're doing. It's really a beautiful gift to the world. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, I hope that didn't end on a bummer of a note for you. I get where she's coming from. She's asking us to deal with our fear about this virus so that we can better get in touch with ourselves in order to live a more full, mindful life. And doing just that is not a bad thing at all. If you'd like to support the show and let me know how much you are inspired by these conversations and how much you look forward to hearing the uplifting stories from my guests, go to patreon.com/bebold. Patreon supporters get to submit questions for me to ask guests and become part of our private Facebook group, and that is Ladies Only. They also get access to bonus content, including questions I ask of the guest. Other ways to support the show, you ask? Of course, you can leave feedback on whatever podcast app you're using to listen to these episodes. Most importantly, make sure you're subscribed. Believe it or not, that actually helps me show up in the search results just a little bit higher. So share these episodes with friends, subscribe, tell them to subscribe. Really, the number one way people find out about podcasts is word of mouth. Many people have a little extra time on their hands these days, so show them the light and introduce them to podcasts, especially this one. To keep up with me and all of my travels, well, when I'm traveling, but I am running, so you can keep up with my running adventures. You can connect with me by friending me on Facebook, and I'm on Instagram at both Beth Whitwa and also Wandergal. Find those links in the show notes. Feel free to leave a message or question at 877-280-5170 or email me at beth@shesboldpodcast.com. Ladies, don't forget to join the Be Bold Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Be Bold group for support and encouragement for whatever ways you're trying to be bold. Thanks for joining me. Truly, thanks for joining me for another episode of the She's Bold podcast. And until next time, be bold.